I have arrived officially. So thank
Congratulations.
you again. And thank you everyone for your patience. Sorry about that. Well, as I was saying, because we recently celebrated a Lunar New Year, and in some countries, the rabbit is the animal. I understand in Vietnam, it's the cat. But I've invented a rabbit for the new year. I call it the dim sum bun. And if I can show you, let's see if I can get this going. You can see that image.
Yeah.
You see the
Yes,
little
all
bunny?
good.
Okay. So when I was in the second grade, I borrowed a book from the library, and the book was about origami, and it was this book. Some of you who are of my vintage may recognize this title, cover, and author. And if you can look in the red rectangle and see in the lower right portion, there's a drawing of an origami rabbit that the book promises to teach how to fold. And these are the partial diagrams. I followed along, and it came up with this model. Sorry about the blaring light of this. And I didn't think that this quite looked like what the cover showed. I was disappointed. I was delighted and disappointed at the same time. And I'm going to show you a drawing that the the people who hired the illustrator, said, well, draw a picture of everything. And that's what I thought I was going to get. You can see the bunny has a distinctly separate head, a little sort of beak shape, and it looks like there are front legs and what have you. But anyway, as a second grader, how old is one in those age, maybe 6 years old, I wanted something that looked more like that. And I wasn't inventing origami just yet. So it was only a few years ago, not that long ago, that I came up with this little bunny, which is what I shall teach you how to fold today. It's folded from a square, and I call it a dim sum bun because along my career, I've became acquainted with the Chinese dim sum tea treats and so forth, and I thought that the title rolls off the tongue, dim sum bun, and it's just like a little bunny, but it's also like a neat little dumpling. And this is a class of origami that I tend to call poems for the fingers. So we're going to learn how to fold this now. And as Nick, I believe, already mentioned, that you should have paper ready using a square. The model that I showed was folded from a square that is colored the same on both sides. But to help explain how to fold this, I'm going to be using the paper that's colored white on one side. All right, so here we go. This is dry folding only. I'll give you some advice about wet folding, maybe a little later on. So let's begin white side up if you're using origami paper that's colored differently. And we're simply going to fold edge to edge in half. A little bit of advice in this model is when dry folding this model, make sharp creases. I like to tell my students origami rule of thumb: slide and glide the side of your thumbnail from one end of the folded edge to the other. And I turned my thumbnail over to the smooth edge so as not to scar the paper. If you keep your thumbnail vertical, you end up with a knife edge of your thumbnail, and that scars the paper. Turning it backwards a little bit is like a nice smooth surface. So now that you know the basic way of doing that, we're going to make a 16 square grid. And hopefully you can see this crease on my paper. one way of dealing with this, I learned from Nick, and I love this method, is to flip the paper over so that you have a raised mountain fold edge, because you can really get to that target much more surely instead of trying to make your raw edge fall into a valley. It really rises up to the mountain ridge much better. And you're going to do the same thing with the opposite edge. So thank you, Nick, for that bit of advice. I use it all the time now. Now, at this stage, it really doesn't matter whether these full-length creases are valleys or mountains on any particular side. And so that's why it's easy to employ Nick's advice on that fold. So to create the 16 square grid, we're going to divide these fourths into fourths. And so you'll rotate your paper so that the creases run vertically, bottom edge to top edge. You'll fold in half, open, and arrange the horizontal mountain crease so that you can use that wonderful little guide to finish your grid. I love that there was a little bit of a math connection by way of calculus with Snell's law highlighted. I'm often in schools teaching math and geometry using origami in the classroom, and it's a wonderful tool. And yes, calculus is eminently modelable and many other things. I thought there was an interesting correlation, though, about the glasses. I thought glasses were more connected to sight than Snell. So that's a little joke. Here's our 16 square grid. If using paper that's white on the other side, put the white side facing up. And the creases are hard to see on my paper, but you do know you have an array of 4 squares by 4 squares, and each corner is occupied by one of those squares. We're simply going to fold the corners in like this to fold each of those corner squares in half diagonally. Like that. And again, origami rule of thumb. I'm going to use another piece of paper to bring your attention to a crease that's in your paper. And it runs this length. We're going to fold so that the diagonal folded edge of this bottom right side triangle will be folded along that crease that I highlighted. Here's a little bit of advice. I'm going to zoom in. Whenever I accumulate edges and layers in against a crease, I make an allowance for the thicknesses that will accumulate there. It's become an automatic habit for me. So I'm going to estimate what this double layer thickness plus that single layer thickness will actually amount to. And I'm going to fold so that that imaginary thickness is going to be spaced that far away from the crease. So you see my folded edge is not exactly up into the crease. This allows for a neater folding when you have to go back and use that crease. If you put everything piled up tightly into that crease, you're going to end up with a thickness there that's going to redirect the crease. So make sure you fold just a little bit away from the crease. We're going to do the same thing to the bottom triangle on the opposite side. It's only those two triangles. Like that. I'm going to zoom out and refocus. Okay. So it's just those two. And now simply fold these flaps over. And if you've done your work well, accommodating for the thickness of the paper into the crease, you should get nice, cleanly folded shapes going right to the corners and no bulkiness deforming your hinge.
Sorry, Mike.
Yes.
Can you repeat géométrie?
Oh,
Le pas non, le pas qui était avant.
Shall I repeat?
Yes. Montre-nous. Ah, yes.
From here? Yes. So I'll leave it zoomed out. Fold the long folded edge of the triangle flap to the crease.
Yes, it's good.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you for letting me know to repeat that. And it's only these two corners, and then we fold over like that. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and focus. If I were wet folding this, I would do something called zone folding, where I would take my paper and I would take a piece of paper towel moistened with water, and I would draw a line, a very faint line with water, and let it soak in, and then make my folds. I wouldn't wet the whole area of the paper. And to guide my folds, I may do something like this. You can see how I'm pretending to fold. And it makes a little channel that guides placing a line of moisture. And then you'll feel that it's nice and soft, and then you can make your folds. So leading up to this shape, I would do what I call zone wet folding, making moist lines exactly where the creases will go. Okay, now let's look at this area at the top, this rectangle, and you can see the crease. Use that crease to fold the paper behind like that. And here's what it looks like on the other side. Now, once we have that shape folded, we will go to this opposite side here. And you can see this square area. We're going to put crossing diagonal valley folds on this side. So take the bottom raw edge and fold up to the, take the bottom raw edge and fold it to the side, like this. I was distracted by this edge because in my mind, I was about to explain that it's helpful to use this edge as a guide to not cross over and lock it. So when you're doing this fold, to put edge to edge here and a nice corner to the bottom there, pay attention to what this folded edge is doing so that it doesn't cross over any of these corners. Unfold. And we're going to repeat to the left. The bottom raw edge is folded to the adjacent folded edge. A nice sharp corner down here. And being careful that the folded edge does not trap this raw edge. And leave the paper this way for a moment. I'm going to switch to a larger paper. So here we are. Along this gap, we're going to put a valley fold. So pick up the rectangular area above the shape and fold it over tightly. And if you've done your work well, you'll feel that nothing is getting trapped, nothing is getting distorted, that it makes a clean hinge. And you want to make that hinge nice and sharp, like that. And unfold. So we have that little hinge. While we have this area open here, we're going to put in a few helping folds in this area. We have a triangle shape. It's a half square triangle. I want you to notice the short creases here and here, the short creases that outline that triangle. They're valley folds. And now notice the longer raw edge at the bottom. And notice this vertical crease. So here's what we do. Fold the raw edge to the valley crease. And fold up until it hits the center crease right there. We've divided this 45-degree angle in half, and the crease stops there. We'll do the same thing on the opposite side. The raw edge to the valley crease. Like that. Okay, then you can flatten those areas out. Flip the paper, top edge to bottom edge. And you can see these square areas on the bottom, right, and left. Fold so that the half square triangle cleanly comes over like that. Unfold that and do the same thing on the other side. The reason why I had you unfold this flap before doing that is to prevent a possible collision here, because these will sometimes be very close to each other. And if the first one remains where it is, it may disturb the placement, the proper placement of the second one. In origami, that's a problem sometimes. So when you're teaching yourself a new model or you're perfecting one you've designed, pay attention to when something is going to be disturbed if an area is going to occlude it. So we have these each folding neatly and well. All right. I know I've just moved everything around a bit. So I want you to flip the paper over to this side that has the large isosceles triangle outlined. And my paper, of course, is white and it's kind of bright here, but I want for you to remember the creases that we recently installed here. I want for you to make them flexible. So you know these creases are here. They're hard for me to emphasize in this lighting, but you can see those. On this side of the paper, they are mountain creases. I'd like for you to take a moment and reverse them. I've reversed them. And so, you know, the question is, well, Michael, why didn't you put them in bending the correct way in the first place? Well, here is an issue that happens in origami sometimes with regard to grain, the direction of the fibers in the paper when it was manufactured, especially machine-made paper. And in origami, many times when we're folding neatly into a corner, even if it's a single layer being folded, the grain can sometimes cause trouble up into the corner. In my experience, there are different ways of dealing with that. But in this particular model, because I'm using some landmarks, I found that if I dry fold one side and then the other, sometimes the grain will cause a little deflection in here, right in the corners. And that deflection is often perfectly removed when that same crease line is reversed into the corner, So even though when I first folded it all went well, I wanted to bring that technique to your attention, because if you ever find that you're making a crease in a single layer into a corner and it gets deflected, pick up the paper, turn it over, reverse the crease right, starting away from the corner and into the corner, away from the corner into the corner, and it will often roll itself out. So try that sometimes. It's actually a very interesting way of dealing with that common problem in dry folding and origami. Okay, we have a network of creases involved here. And this portion of the little bunny is going to be its top side or back side. And here in this larger area, we have the pre-creases for a commonly folded shape in origami. It's often called the water bomb or the balloon base. I'm going to do that several times so that you can see what's going on. The diagonal valley creases on this side, we're going to just pretend that they're 4 segments. Here's one line segment from the vertex in the center. There's another line segment, that's 2, 3, and 4. And leading from that same vertex away horizontally is a mountain crease, and away horizontally this way is another mountain crease. You can see the form. And so we're just going to use the creases as they exist and pick up this shape. By itself, it's already a completed origami bunny rabbit of some kind. There are many versions of my dim sum bun possible just from this base. Now, while the bunny is nice and flat, I'm going to draw your attention to this folded edge along the back. And also this folded edge that runs down at a 45-degree angle. And this point right here. So the first thing we're going to do is put a short crease about this length, R-A-T, rat, right about there. Like this. Make it a mountain fold. And pinch. So you can see this shape. And then from this new point you've created, make a mountain fold that goes up to this point at the top, right at the back of the head. So it's an inside reverse fold. Don't put a sharp crease across here. It's okay to put a soft one, but don't put a sharp one. Here's what the back looks like. And we're going to reverse these 2 new creases. So unfold and flip the bunny over, and valleys become mountains. So Nick, this is a little bit different than the way I taught you when we were in Germany. I remember us sitting down on several occasions, and in one occasion you taught me how to fold that marvelous bird, and in exchange I showed you how to fold this little bunny. I had you do this little saddle shape a bit differently, and since then I've found that this has much better control. So let's flatten everything out, and we'll use those creases shortly, but you can see we've got this half of a kite shape. It's of course a triangle, but if you imagine it reflected, duplicated and reflected, perhaps you can see that there's a kite.
That's the part of the tail.
Well, yes, so this is going to be the tail. Yeah. Up in here between the ears, you're going to find those creases that you installed earlier and just push them in, inside reverse fold. And flatten. I'm going to repeat that. So inside the top of the head where the ears are, you'll find this raw edge. Using the existing creases, inside reverse fold it and flatten. Poetry using words often include rhymes. Not all poems do, but many do. And that's a classic way of doing things. And when I decided to call certain kinds of origami poems for the fingers, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are rhymes involved. There may be. A lot of the rhymes in origami happen when the geometry works out so neatly and so cleanly and seems to be its own kind of eloquence. And so when it, like the origami crane, when you fold that, there's just a beauty to the geometry. And when there's reflected and common and congruent shapes and they fall together in such a beautiful way in your hands, it's like a poem being expressed, but not with words and with your speaking, but with your fingers. And there are all kinds of poems. There are abstract poems, poems that don't rhyme, poems that are very serious, poems that are charming and sweet. And origami has all of those possibilities too. But when I'm folding this type of origami, it does make me feel like it's some type of poetry in your hands. And so here we have this shape that's now going to become three-dimensional, a little bit more complex. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit and refocus. And I'm going to point out this spot right here, this point right here. And it's actually on this layer of paper. You can see a crease that runs at this end to that point. I'm going to call that the pivot point. Now, see this point down here, where the two colors meet at this folded edge. I'm going to call that the target point. So we're going to be putting a valley fold that runs from the pivot point to the target point. And to do that, you're going to get your fingers underneath. You can take the end of your thumbnail or the end of a fingernail and put it at the pivot point to be sure that your fold doesn't go up here or begin down there, but it starts precisely at the pivot point. You lift it away and put that crease firmly in place, point to point. And then unfold, and here you can see the result. A valley crease, pivot point to target point. I'll do that again. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Pivot point to target point. If I were wet folding this model, from this point on, I would be wet folding by moistening the entire model. I might spray a little water inside. I might even open up these layers and spray a little water inside and blot the excess water with paper towels. I remember studying with Yoshizawa on many occasions where he would wet the paper And then he would put a face cloth, a little terry towel on top of it, and then he would hold his hands on it. And what he was doing was letting the moisture have time to travel through the layers and just sort of equalize, as well as blot up the excess outside moisture. And it almost looked like he was meditating while waiting for that to happen. And that reminded me that even though one feels that you have to really start folding, to get through a model and wet folding because it dries out as you go, you have a kind of a time constraint. But at the same time, you shouldn't feel hectic. It's a meditation, and you should have mastered it by the time you're wet folding it, so you can surely start and end without wasting any motion. Okay, so we have these creases involved. All right, now let's take a look at this point. You see where this V notch has a vertex here, a little point. And if I pinch the paper just there, I've got that point constrained by my left hand. We're about to do what I like to call a swivel squash. You can put your paper flat on the table if you wish and constrain that point this way. And now you're going to use the earlier crease and squash fold, constrained by this point and fully using that crease. I'll undo that and do it again. There's my point of constraint. You open the pocket, use this hinge, flatten, and here's the shape. Reminds me of a lop-eared rabbit with the big floppy lopping, ears hanging down. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So you flip the paper over, find the constraint, open the pocket, and squash. We're almost done. Now we can bring the ears back up. And see what that does. I promised myself one day I'm going to design an origami bat that uses this head. It looks like one of the large-eared bats that I've studied in the past. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to graft this onto an origami bat that would have the proper style to accommodate this head. But wait, there's more. Remember how fond I was of calling this point the pivot point? It's really going to earn its name in this next step. So here we have this pivot point. And we have a lot of creases in place for us to be successful with this next little bit. Using the hand that you don't write with, hold the bunny rabbit open at its bottom edge like this. Using the hand that you write with, grab here, just below the constraint point and above the bunny's nose. And then using the pivot point, push in like this. Keep pushing until you're able to flatten this corner. all the layers right up to the pivot point. I'm going to repeat that. There's our pivot point. Find a comfortable way of making the paper open so that the pivot will happen inside the layers. Hold comfortably and push to pivot and flatten. You want your flattening to happen all the way up to the pivot point from the nose. And then lift open the head. So that's the proper look for this one. We're going to make the back become saddle shaped by following the creases carefully placed there earlier. The way to do that is simply to open from inside and underneath, find that kite shape outline and push in and retrace the mountain crease outline like that. We just have to shape the back edge and then our little dim sum bun will be complete. But I want to make sure everybody's caught up with this. I'll turn it this way. When wet folding, I don't put in the pre-creases. I just open the model and then I use my fingers to just put the shape in there. And it works just fine. I'm used to it. I've made so many of these. But the pre-creasing is certainly welcome in the wet folding stage if you feel more comfortable doing that. Nature doesn't often have right angles. And so we are going to get rid of the right angles and have something that's a bit more dynamic looking. You can see what I've done at the back of this one. And I'll give you some guides to think about. Imagine this sloping mountain crease continuing until it would intersect some point on this back edge. And make that placement in your mind, your imagination, as being the starting point. And then down here, imagine a point directly below this bend in the saddle, a point right about there. Between these 2 points, you would place a mountain crease. It doesn't have to be precise. But I should have said a mountain fold because it is a proper fold. And you can see how the line, how your eye travels along this line and finds rest here. And then you see how your eye may find this point and then travel down. And I've missed it a little bit. I have to actually fold just a little bit more. Anytime you look at something, whether it's a drawing, a sculpture, a painting, a thing of real, a real substance in the world, take a moment to realize what your eye is doing when it's actually looking at it. How is your eye following the lines, the shapes? Which colors are drawing your eye first, and which ones do you eventually discover? And it will give you a good deal of insight when you're designing origami or folding someone else's work as to judgment of color, of folds, especially if there are expressive folds or wrap folds. But when you're designing, certainly, you'll find, well, I don't know what's wrong with that thing. Why am I not satisfied with it? If you stop for a moment and look at it and ask yourself, what is my eye doing when it studies this. And what about what it's doing is annoying me? Why do I not find this comfortable to look at? You may find the remedy. You might say, I see what's bothering my eye, and then you can find a solution perhaps of design to fix that. So here we are with the finished dim sum bun, dry folded. This crease here on each side is important as far as it being a valley fold. So I want to remind you where that happened. Remember when we were here and we did this, and then we did that, and we were careful not to perturb that edge, and then we did that. There's the valley crease. That I regard as an essential part of the design for the little bunny to have its narrowed area here and to keep these triangle facets, this one and that one, distinct and flexible. The bunny rabbit can sit this way. I'm not sure if it's clear. You could have it sitting on this edge so that it would look like this, basically, as if it's thinking, am I going to jump up onto there, or what's on that countertop? Are there bunny biscuits up there for me to eat? Or more commonly, I like to rest it on these bottom edges here, which gives it that classic little look. So that was my solution to something that bothered me since I was in the 2nd grade, that I didn't seem to, find that this book gave what it promised. And perhaps you have origami projects out there that you feel the same way, and that demands for you to solve the problem in an origami design way. So, so thank you, everyone. I hope you were all successful, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Sorry, but my tail is a little bit ripped. Can I fix it with tape, or is that a problem?
Oh, but it's if it ripped, you can make another one, and you certainly may fix it with tape, anything you wish. And this brings up an interesting point. When I'm teaching origami in the classroom in a school, especially with young children, sometimes they're really upset that their paper ripped while they were folding, and they might even begin to cry. I've actually seen adults do that. It is something that can be bothersome, but I will often tell people it's only a piece of paper. You can certainly fold another one, and I'll go right up to their paper, and I will fix it, or I will. I don't know if any of you teach in schools, but I will often have already folded things handy to instantly replace a torn origami model. It rarely happens, but I'm always ready to do that because, of course, in the classroom, we have a time constraint, and I want to make sure that the person feels comfortable continuing with the lesson rather than focusing on the damage. So you may tape it. And I believe these videos are going to be, these are recorded. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, that's right.
So, so hopefully you'll try folding one again from the videos. So if there are any questions, I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I'll be happy to take some questions from anyone.
We have 5 minutes, so if people want to ask you something, a burning question.
Okay. And welcome to our studio, but go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you.
It's
thank
it was one of the best lessons I had in the past time. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
Thank
And
you.
I
That's
think
very kind.
we learned a lot for designing, folding, and I appreciate your English because
Oh,
I understand everything.
Oh,
And for
thank
me,
you.
it's also an English lesson. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Well, and Nick, this is part of the Origami Didactics organization. Is that correct?
That's right.
Mhm.
Well, in the spirit of that, Nick and I, and so many of us who enjoy origami and love teaching, we always strive to improve our teaching skills and our communication skills. I'm always learning. So, so I thank you all too for your patience with me and for letting me learn by teaching once again.
Lee, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's half a question and half a bit of admiration, really, Michael. There's a thing in some models that we see, and it tends to only be in simpler models, I think. And it's about when we're holding the thing in the hand, and your little rabbit, and some of your other models do this, and it's where the layers align really beautifully, so that when we make a fold, the layers are helping us, and the paper just goes to the right place. And I just wondered if you've ever got to, these are discoveries that happen by accident often, but I wondered if you'd ever got to a technique that might help us find these things for ourselves.
Lee, you hit on a very important thing. I'm often thinking about something that Michael Schall once complained about with the way technical origami was growing in the early 70s, the late 60s and early 70s. He used the word tortured, that so many models looked tortured because they were being geometrically forced to produce all these extra limbs. Today we have elegant solutions to those production efforts of making complexities appear beautifully. But in the beginning, it was a bit of a brutal thing. And I never forgot that. And I always thought that I'll have a vision for a design, but I will most often, after a certain point, let what you said, things fall beautifully into place to guide my completing the model design. That's something that I think people should be mindful of, and I certainly am. And thank you for bringing that up.
May I make a comment?
Oh, yeah.
Michael, I think two things that you do and demonstrated so beautifully. One is the way in which you guided the folder's attention.
Oh.
You prepared for the fold by guiding their attention. And the second thing that you did is you instructed the folder where to place their hands. So often that is neglected. And I thought you just did a masterful job of instructing where to hold the model and where to focus attention.
Oh, thank you. I learned that from Master Yoshizawa, studying with him. He would teach in Japanese, and I didn't understand what he was saying most of the time. But watching his hands, and he was very deliberate of emphasizing by motion and placement how to hold before you fold. I never forgot that. What a brilliant man he was for design, but also he was a wonderful teacher. If you ever had the pleasure in person with him. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Michael, I think we're running short of time, and thank you again for what is always a masterclass, and not just in folding, but in philosophy and appreciation of the art that we love so much. So we can watch your videos over and over again, and we learn something new each time. So thank you for your time and your energies.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Lee, and everyone for all of your efforts in this. I know it's a lot of behind the scenes work, and it's just wonderfully done. So thank you. So I will say goodbye then, and please certainly enjoy the rest of this. Is it officially a convention?
It's a
Or-
virtual convention, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.